Hi, in this video we're going to review how to deploy a simple headend based on the version 21.2.1 Bionic. The topology that we will be using can be taken from the ramp up guide. So this is a system engineering ramp up guide, and here's the simple headend. Usually simple headend is used for the demo purposes or for the local labbing, so at least system engineers or new people to the Versa architecture can practice with their SD-WAN topologies. So for this specific session, we're going to use the topology with one director, one analytics, and one controller. This is the minimum required configuration which is needed to use the Versa SD-WAN software. In this video, I will use GNS3 as the virtualization system. You can use anything you want, so you can use KVM, maybe bare metal devices, or maybe ESXi from VMware, or any other virtualization software of your choice. So in this GNS3, I already have a couple of devices deployed. So I have VOS device, I have the director of the 21.2.1, and I have analytics, and we're going to deploy 3 of those. Now let's create networks. So we're going to create the network which is going to be our management network. Next network is going to be the control network, and we're going to create the MPLS network, and probably just in case we'll create the internet network as well. So now this will be our management, this will be our control network, this will be our iNet network, and MPLS network. So management network, control network, MPLS network, and additional one that I'm using for this example is just the internet network. Now let's name the devices. This will be my director 1, this will be analytics 1, and this will be controller 1. So let's bring them up, and while the devices are starting, we're going to connect them to the appropriate network connections. So let's connect management network to the director Ethernet 0. We'll also connect it to the analytics Ethernet 0. We will connect management network to the controller Ethernet 0, and we will connect this to my internal network. So the internal network is provided in the GNS3 through the cloud device. In your virtualization system, you just need to find the device which provides you access to your internal network. So now we have access there. Next, let's connect the control network. The control is connected through the southbound interfaces of the director, analytics, and let's connect southbound interface of the controller to the control network as well. That one is already taken to this one. And just so it's easier to see, we're going to make it like this. Now, for this headend, we're also going to need at least one Versa OS device, which we will test to onboard in this topology. So let's call it branch 11. So branch 11. And now we're going to connect the iNet network to the controller interface Ethernet 2, and MPLS network to the controller's network Ethernet 3. Also, we're going to connect internet to the branch Ethernet 1 and MPLS to the branch Ethernet 2. So for now, we're not going to enable branch 11 because we still need to configure our headend. And let's bring these devices up just to make it a little more fancier to look on the screen. And let's make the background just so we don't see the management connections. So now we have the headend. On the headend we have director, analytics, and controller, exactly as in here. So they all have connection to the management network, director, analytics, and controller, and we also have 3 of them connected to the control network. So let's establish console connection to all 3 devices. So here they are, analytics, controller, and director. we will begin with the director configuration. So for this, let's log in as administrator. And this is mandatory because there are 3 different logins for each of the components. Administrator for the director, admin for FlexPan app or Versa OS, and Versa for the analytics platform. So the password is standard Versa123 for all 3 components. We're going to say yes, we want to run the initial setup. Versa123 is our password. Now, system will ask us if we want to set up the host name. Yes, we want to set it up. In our case, it's going to be director1. Okay, now the system will ask us if we want to configure interfaces. Yes, we want to configure Ethernet 0. And we want to reconfigure configuration. So the IP address here is going to be 10.40.113.81. NAT mask in my case is 255.255.0.0. Gateway, yes, let's configure it 10.40.0.1. Next, let's configure another interface, our southbound interface. So the southbound interface here is the control network, and the subnet is going to be 172.16.100. So 172.16.100, and let's give the last octet the same 81. NAT mask 255.255.255.0. And no, we don't want to configure another interface, and yes, we want to assign roles to the interfaces. Ethernet 0 is going to be our northbound interface, Ethernet 1 is going to be our southbound interface. Configure another one? No. Next, the system asks us if we need to enable secure mode for director HA ports. In this lab, we will not configure any high availabilities, so we will say no, and the same for the HA communication, we'll also say no. Okay, and do we want to prompt for the new password at the first login? Let's say yes. So the system is restarting services, and while it is restarting, let's do initial configuration on the analytics. So we're gonna log in to the analytics as the user Versa, and the password Versa123, and we need to configure IP addresses. So for this, we need to edit file etc network interfaces. Let's change the default configuration from DHCP to the static. The address is going to be 10.40.113. In our case, subnet 10.40.113, and let's give it 91. NAT mask 255.255.0.0, gateway 10.40.0.1. Next, we also need to configure Ethernet 1. So iface eth1, inet static, address, and the address should be from the range 172.16.100 in my case, 172.16.191, NAT mask 255.255.255.0, and that's it. So now sudo if down Ethernet 0, same Ethernet 1, and sudo if up Ethernet 0, and sudo if up Ethernet 1. Okay, we have the IP address configured on Ethernet 0, and we have IP address configured on Ethernet 1. Lastly, network interfaces. So let's see the configuration that we've done. We need to also configure interface on the controller, at least for initial connection from the director. So let's log in as admin. Versa123 is the password. We're also editing network interfaces. We're pasting the configuration, and for the controller, the IP address is going to be 71. So once again, I just copied the line from analytics. On analytics, we have the IP address ending with 91. On the controller, I'm making it 71. Let's save it, and sudo if down Ethernet 0, sudo if up Ethernet 0. And let's see. We have the IP address. Let's see if we can reach the director and analytics from the controller. So let's ping director 81. Yes, we can reach. And 91 is the analytics. Yes, we have reachability. What about the reachability to the gateway? Okay, the gateway is reachable, so we are good to go. Next, the director setup is over. So now we need to do initial login on the director through the GUI. And in the GUI, we need to do configuration of the analytics cluster before we proceed for the configuration between director and analytics. So for this, let's open in the incognito mode connection to the director. Yes, we are trusting the certificate. Let's log in as administrator, Bursa 123. On the first login, system will ask us to change the password as we requested, and I'm going to change it to something a little more complex. Okay, and now let's log in. So the very first thing that we will do will be the configuration in here in the connectors analytics cluster. We're going to configure analytics cluster. The first node that we configure there is analytics 1, and the IP address is 10.40.113.91. So just to show you where I'm taking this from, on the analytics, we configured this IP address on the Ethernet 0, and now we need to also configure Ethernet 1 in the GUI in the list of southbound interfaces. So the port is going to be 8443, and collector port is 1234. And let's click plus to add. Okay, so we added first analytics cluster, which is good, and now we're ready to continue a configuration on the Bursa director to configure communication between the director and analytics. So for this, let's log in, administrator. Actually, let me SSH here, it's going to be much easier. So we will SSH to 10.40.113.81 with the username administrator. And to configure communication between analytics and the director, we need to go to the folder opt Bursa VNMS scripts, van cluster config, van cluster install. And here in this folder, we need to edit file which is called cluster setup.conf. Okay, the size of the analytics cluster is going to be 1 because we have only one analytics device. We do not have any forwarders, so let's put 0 in here. We will configure only one director, and we're going to put this information here. The username administrator. Now, the northbound IP address of the director. In my case, it is 10.40.113.81. This is the IP address of the GUI of the director. So in this file, it's called RPC address. So next one is the IP address where we will be listening on the southbound. 181 is the southbound IP address. Now, configuration of the analytics node. We need to configure only one analytics node, and once again, for the standalone simple cluster configuration, we only need to configure mode as standalone. The host name is going to be analytics1. Based on this file, the system will change the host name, will configure interfaces, all the records and everything. And the personality, together with the mode, we need to change it to the standalone again as well. So we changed. Lastly, we need to configure IP addresses. So there are 3 IP addresses which needs to be configured. So the northbound, the southbound. So for the northbound, from the 1040 address space, for the southbound from the control 172.16.100 space. So let's configure RPC address 10.40.113.91 listen address is 172.16.191, and the collector is the same as listen, in our case for this simple headend deployment. So the last should be the same. Now we need to run the configuration script. To do this, you need to run command sudo -u versa to simulate like we're running it from the Versa user, and /van_cluster installer py. The script will ask us the password for the director SSH access. We're gonna say versa123. The same for analytics. Okay, and do we want to proceed with configuration? Yes, we want to proceed with configuration. Okay, so this step will take approximately 5 minutes, so I'll pause the recording for the time being. Okay, the first step is done. This is good. So the installation went through and the configuration of the analytics cluster is done. Next, we need to synchronize certificates. So for this, first let's see the help info. Okay, so we need to run the same script, sudo -u versa van setup cluster, but with two options. First is the post setup, where we will synchronize all the certificates between the director and analytics. And the second option, because this is the lab, we need to generate the Versa director certificate, the proper for the host name which I created, in this case director1. So two options, post setup and gen video cert. So let's run it again. The system will ask us for the password for the director, analytics again, and it will begin installation. So the certificate generation requires multiple restarts of the director, analytics, and so on. So usually this process takes from 5 to 10 minutes. And I will pause the recording once again at this step. Okay, the installation of the script is done, installing analytics certificates, so everything is good. Now, technically, configuration in the CLI is over, and we can proceed to the GUI. So first of all, let's refresh the page. Actually, better even relogin. So administrator, Versa !23. Okay, and let's see if analytics can work. If this screen will open, it means that configuration of all the certificates between analytics and director are correct. Okay, that's good. So next, let's add the controller. To do this, first of all, let's go to administration and, okay, so just in case, let's re-log in. So we're gonna once again log in as administrator versus !23. So the first thing, before we add the first controller, we need to define the overlay scheme. And to do this, you can go into the SD-WAN settings, and here we have the default overlay scheme, which was recommended in the versions prior to the 21.1. So we can change it to something smaller, like 10.55.00/19, for example. Click OK. And this will be our overlay schema. So also, let's configure on the director the static route, which will be pointing to that prefix. So let's call it overlay 10.55.00/19. Next hop IP address will be the IP address on the controller on the control network. In my case, this IP address will be 172.16.100.71, because for all controller interfaces, I'm just assigning 71 IPs. And in this specific one, let me see where's the overlay scheme. So for this specific one, on the controller, we'll have 172.16.100.71. Okay, So this is next hop IP. This is reachable via Ethernet 1. So the overlay scheme is configured and ready to use. Next, let's go into the workflow to add the first controller. So we're clicking plus. We are giving it name, controller 1. The IP address of the northbound IP address of the controller is 10.40.113.71. So once again, this is the IP address which will be on the management network of the controller. So the analytics is this one. The organization, we need to create our very first organization. So from here, you can click on plus, create organization, and very important, you must specify for the very first organization ID1. If you do not specify ID1 for the first organization, your onboarding will fail of the devices. So we're going to call the first organization Versa. The organization ID is 1. The analytics cluster in here, analytics, and OK. So the first organization is created. Good. And don't forget to click staging controller so devices can stage through this controller to become SD-WAN devices. Next, on the location, we only need to provide to at least country. On the control network, we will call it control LAN. The IP address is the one which we already configured, 172.168.100.71/24. That's the one to which director will be pointing for the overlay. In our case, we don't need to configure gateway, we don't need to configure routing protocols, so let's just configure WAN interfaces now. And for the WAN interfaces, we have two interfaces, VNI01 and VNI02, which will be our internet and MPLS accordingly. So right now we don't have any networks. Let's create two of those. So this one is going to be INET in the transport domain internet. And the second one is going to be MPLS in the transport domain MPLS. This one is INET, this one is MPLS. According to the scheme, the MPLS will be 172.16.20.0. For the internet, I will use 172.16.10.0. So 172.16.10.71/24 with IP address. I'm just going to give some random number here. In here for the MPLS, 172.16.20.71/24 and 172.16.20, again some random number for gateway. Anyway, I don't have any device which would be the gateway in there. For the pool size for onboarding, usually you don't need for the lab more than 16 devices to be there. It's more than enough. So, and we can specify that we're allowing for the other devices to onboard through both of these interfaces, through the INET and through the MPLS. And we can click deploy. Okay, the deployment is proceeding. Okay, super. So the headend deployment is completed. Now the only part which is left is just to do verification if we can onboard at least one branch. To do this, let's create some template. So we're going to say a simple template. So this will be for the Versa organization with some minimum license. We're going to say continue. Here we will configure two WAN interfaces. Those are going to be our INET and MPLS. Both of them are going to be static. And we will configure one LAN interface. LAN. And let's click continue. So the rest is going to be the same. So we'll just create this template. In the meantime, let's also create the device. The device is going to be a branch 11. So let's see in my virtualization system, branch 11. And by the way, let's bring it up. So while this is coming up, we'll open the console. and continue in the meantime configuration. The serial number, we will create a serial number the same as the name of this branch, but just for this case. In production, of course, you will have the real serial numbers. So the organization is first, and let's create the very first device group. So DG simple, with a simple post-staging template, which we just previously configured. Okay, the country USA, let's say California. And in the bind data, we need to do a configuration for the INET, MPLS, and the gateways. So for the INET, my IP address is going to be 172.16.10.11/24. For the MPLS, 172.16.20.11/24. Gateway for MPLS, once again, any value, because I don't have the real gateway, so just some placeholder. And the LAN, I don't know, let's give it 10.0.0.1/24. Okay, and deploy. Okay, so the configuration of this branch device is deployed to the director, and we are ready and waiting for the device to connect. So let's see, device came up, versa 1, 2, 3, and we need to stage this device using the script sudo opt versa scripts staging.py. Here's all the available options. So from these options, let's just open the notepad and create the onboarding script which will be used. So it's gonna be sudo staging minus n serial number will be branch 11. Minus interface should be the first available VNI00. For this static IP address which will be configured, we're gonna say 172.16.10.11/24, and the gateway, once again, dummy interface, this one. For the controller IP address, this will be 172.16.10.71, the IP address which we configured on the controller on the INET network. And let's see it once again. So if we're gonna go in the appliances on the controller, we'll see in the configuration the interface config on the INET is 172.16.10.71. That's exactly the interface which will be used for onboarding. Next, we would need to provide two options. -L, the local authentication for the branch. The values for it you can take from the controller. In the IPsec section in the VPN profile of the INET, we will see in the IKE the identity for the controller. Actually, wait. This is, yes, the identity for the controller is this one. This will be -R. And the local one is going to be sd1-branch@versa.com. So now let's copy this line and let's use it for onboarding. Okay, device is onboarding. Let's observe how it is onboarding from the director's GUI. Okay, looks like we're good to go. We see the device connected. We're applying configuration. So if we are applying configuration, it means that we already have connectivity between this branch and the director, and this means that we deployed the headend correctly. Okay, the deployment went through, and the device most probably went to reboot. Yes, so we already got the logout message. It means that after the onboarding, device went for reboot, and it should come up in a couple of minutes. This finalizes the video on the simple headend deployments. I hope this was informative.